Their Eyes Were Watching God, Chapter 7. The years took all the fight out of Janie's face. For a while, she thought it was gone from her soul. No matter what Jody did, she said nothing. She had learned how to talk some and leave some. She was a rut in the road. Plenty of life beneath the surface, but it was kept beaten down by the wheels. Sometimes she stuck out into the future, imagining her life different from what it was. But mostly, she lived between her hat and her heels, with her emotional disturbances like shade patterns in the woods, come and gone with the sun. She got nothing from Jody except what money could buy, and she was giving away what she didn't value. Now and again, she thought of a country road at sunup and considered flight. To where? To what? Then, too, she considered 35 is twice 17, and nothing was the same at all. Maybe he ain't nothing, she cautioned herself, but he is something in my mouth. He's gotta be, else I ain't got nothing to live for. I'll lie and say he is. If I don't, life won't be nothing but a store and a house. She didn't read books, so she didn't know that she was the world and the heavens boiled down to a drop. Man attempting to climb to painless heights from his dunghill. So we have a big time jump here. So it's been almost 10 years, and Janie is now 35. And so when she's thinking about her age, she finds this really limiting because she feels as though she's too old to start over. When she was 17 years old and she left Logan to run off with Jody, she felt like she had the whole world ahead of her. Now she feels as though things are different. And so Janie has submitted to her unhappy life. But she pretends that her life has meaning because the alternative is too harsh. And we see this in the line where she says, life won't be nothing but a store and a house. Now, this material life is not satisfying to her. The fact that her life is just things that money can buy, that it's just the store, that's just the house, this makes her really miserable. So she pretends that Jody actually is someone that she loves and someone that she's proud to be with because she needs that to be the truth of her life. And Hurston writes that Janie didn't read books, so she didn't know. And essentially what Hurston is saying is that this life is all that Janie knows. I mean, think about it. She ran off with Jody when she was just a teenager, and she's been with him for twice as long, like she's been there for 17 more years. So she left with him when she was 17, and she spent 18 years with him. And so it's all she really knows. And she doesn't read books, which means she doesn't have an alternative, another perspective, something else she could do. And so Janie doesn't know any other options than what she's living right now. So let's keep reading. Then one day she sat and watched the shadow of herself going about tending store and prostrating itself before Jody, while all the time she herself sat under a shady tree with the wind blowing through her hair and her clothes, somebody near about making summertime out of loneliness. And so here we see that Janie feels detached from her life, where her mind is somewhere completely different than where her body is. And we see the shady tree here. If you're focusing on tree symbolism, here's another instance of it. This was the first time it happened, but after a while it got so common she ceased to be surprised. It was like a drug. In a way, it was good because it reconciled her to things. She got so she received all things with the stolidness of the earth, which soaks up urine and perfume with the same indifference. And so let's focus in on that quote really quick that I just read. Essentially what it's saying is that Janie's so detached from her life that when bad things happen and good things happen, she reacts the same way, which is with indifference, which means that she just doesn't care. She's so depressed that she doesn't care whenever something happens in her life, and she just takes it. And doesn't react really. All right, let's continue reading. One day she noticed that Joe didn't sit down. He just stood in front of a chair and fell in it. That made her look at him all over. Joe wasn't so young as he used to be. There was already something dead about him. He didn't rear back in his knees any longer. He squatted over his ankles when he walked, that stillness at the back of his neck. His prosperous-looking belly that used to thrust out so pugnaciously and intimidate folks sagged like a load suspended from his loins. It didn't seem to be part of him anymore. Eyes a little absent, too. So here we see that Jody is sick and possibly dying. And it reads, Jody must have noticed it, too. Maybe he had seen it long before Janie did and had the fearing for her to see, because he began to talk about her age all the time, as if he didn't want her to stay young while he grew old. It was always, you ought to throw something over your shoulders before you go outside. You ain't no young pullet no more. You's an old hen now. One day he called her off the croquet grounds. That's something for the young folks, Janie. You out there jumping around and won't be able to get out of bed tomorrow. If he thought to deceive her, he was wrong. For the first time, she could see a man's head naked of its skull. She saw the cunning thoughts race in and out through the caves and promontories of his mind long before they darted out of the tunnels of his mouth. So here we see Jody is sick and possibly dying. And I want for you to remember in the last chapter, the mule that died because it got too fat. And remember the buzzards chanting, "What killed this man? Bear, bear, fat." And we talked about how that had a very ominous tone, that something bad was going to happen. And here we now see very subtle references to it, where it talks about his belly that's sagging and the fact that he's getting old and heavy. This is supposed to reference the dying mule in a very ominous way. So it reads, she saw he was hurting inside, so she let it pass without talking. She just measured out a little time for him and set it aside to wait. It got to be terrible in the store. The more his back ached and his muscles dissolved into fat and the fat melted off his bones, the more fractious he became with Janie, especially in the store. The more people in there, the more ridicule he poured over her body to point attention away from his own. So one day, Steve Mixon wanted some chewing tobacco, and Janie cut it wrong. She hated that tobacco knife anyway. It worked very stiff. She fumbled with the thing and cut way away from the mark. Mixon didn't mind. He held it up for a joke to tease Janie a little. "Look a here, Brother Mayor, what your wife done took and done." It was a cut comical, so everybody laughed at it. A woman and a knife. No kind of knife don't belong together. There was some more good-natured laughter at the expense of women. Jody didn't laugh. He hurried across the post office side and took the plug of tobacco away from Mixon and cut it again. Cut it exactly on the mark and glared at Janie. "I, God Almighty, a woman stand round in the store till she gets old as Methuselah and still can't cut a little thing like a plug of tobacco? Don't stand here rolling your Popeyes at with your rump hanging nearly to your knees." A big laugh started off in the store, but people got to thinking and stopped. It was funny if you looked at it right quick, but it got pitiful if you thought about it a while. It was like somebody snatched off a part of a woman's clothes while she wasn't looking, and the streets were crowded. Then, too, Janie took the middle of the store to talk right into Jody's face, and that was something that hadn't been done before. "Stop mixing up my doings with my looks, Jody. When you get through telling me how to cut a plug of tobacco, then you can tell me whether man behind is on straight or not." So, Janie and Jody are about to go into a pretty big fight. So think about how the fight occurs. "What'd you say, Janie? You must be out of your head." "Nah, I ain't out of my head neither. You must be, talking any such language as that. You the one started talking under people's clothes, not me. What's the matter with you nohow? You ain't no young girl to be getting all insulted about your looks. You ain't no young courtin' gal. You's an old woman, nearly 40. Yeah, I'm nearly 40 and you's already 50. How come you can't talk about that sometimes instead of always pointing out at me? Ain't no use getting all mad, Janie, 'cause I mention you ain't no young gal no more. Nobody in here ain't looking for no wife out of you, old as you is. Nah, I ain't no young gal no more, but then I ain't no old woman neither. I reckon I looks my age too, but I'm a woman every inch of me, and I knows it. That's a whole lot more than you can say. You big bellies around here and put out a lot of brag, but ain't nothing to it but your big voice. Talking about me looking old, when you pull down your britches, you look like you've changed a life." "Great God from Zion," Sam Watson gasped. "You're really playing the dozen tonight." What did you say?" Joe challenged, hoping his ears had fooled him. You heard her. You ain't blind," Walter taunted. "I'd rather be shot with tacks than hear about myself," Lidge Moss commiserated. Then Joe Starks realized all the meaning, and his vanity bled like a flood. Janie had robbed him of his illusion of irresistible maleness that all men cherish, which was terrible. The thing that Saul's daughter had done to David. But Janie had done worse. She had cast down his empty armor before men, and they had laughed. So in this fight, Jody has been criticizing Janie's looks and calling her old, and he's doing this because he's self-conscious. He wants to distract from his own illness and his old age by pointing out physical flaws in her. And Janie finally has enough with it and stands up for herself. And so she criticizes his age and his body in front of other men. And this destroys Jody's image of himself. This is what we call emasculating, when Janie kind of takes away his feeling of being a man in front of other people. And so Jody is really upset about this and becomes even more self-conscious because of the things that Janie has said. Let's see how he reacts. When he paraded his possessions hereafter, they, the townspeople, would not consider the two together. They'd look with envy at the things and pity the man that owned them. When he sat in judgment, it would be the same. Good-for-nothings like Dave and Lum and Jim wouldn't change place with him. For what can excuse a man in the eyes of other men for lack of strength? Raggedy, behind squirts of 16 and 17, would be giving him their merciless pity out of their eyes while their mouths said something humble. There was nothing to do in life anymore. Ambition was useless, and the cruel deceit of Janie, making all that show of humbleness and scorning him all the time, laughing at him, and now putting the town up to do the same. Joe Starks didn't know the words for all of this, but he knew the feeling, so he struck Janie with all his might and drove her from the store. So Jody realizes after this fight that people are going to treat him differently. Janie's pointed out kind of these flaws that have been developing in his physical form, but also in his personality. He's becoming weaker because he's sick. And he knows that now that people see this, they're going to pity him and treat him differently. And so Janie has taken away his power by pointing out his flaws publicly. Now, Jody doesn't know how to explain the way he's feeling, and this has been an ongoing problem with them. They can't communicate, and so it just results in fights. And also, Jody hits Janie as hard as he can and chases her out of the store, store. And so the fact that Jody can't express all these emotions, he goes to physically harming Janie instead. And this is his attempt at regaining his power. He hits her so that it shows that he is more powerful than the words that she has said to him. And do you think this will work? Do you think that Jody hitting Janie is going to make him regain his power? What do you think? Think about it and be ready to talk about it when we go over this in an upcoming class activity. And also, how do you feel about Janie in this chapter, and how do you feel about Jody? What do you think about the things that Janie has said to Jody, and what do you think about the things that Jody has done to Janie? Have an opinion ready for this because I'm curious about what you think. All right, please move on to chapter 8. Since this chapter is short, you got another one to cover. All right, see you in chapter 8. Bye.